Well, thank you to Barclay, my good friend, for really leading us through a really interesting intellectual study. Really, I thought it was fascinating. I'm going to do something very different. We're going to turn to government. How exciting is government? Some people are excited about it. But actually, government is important as we contemplate this very interesting new future that is sort of creating this massive amount of anxiety and massive amount of excitement the world over. And you guys are all feeling it, right? Just as we are, just as people across the world are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Utah is doing, how Utah is approaching this massive new paradigm that has us all anxious and has us all excited. All right, so let's see if I go to my next, is this gonna work? Very good. Okay, so that is me, I guess, in an official looking picture. I am the head of the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Commerce is really the main business regulator for the state of Utah, which most people don't get very excited about, I have to say. I grew up in a household of entrepreneurs, and the word regulation was a four-letter word in my home. And so there's some degree of irony that is my job now. But I work for Governor Spencer Cox, and he also shares this massive anxiety and massive excitement. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we're approaching it. So first, I wanted to just kind of let you know, broadly speaking, that Utah has led out on many dimensions when it comes to AI, in regulatory policy, in state government, in energy, in a lot of different dimensions already. We have gotten international recognition for our approach to AI. So what I'm going to do is talk about how we can sort of leverage that existing leadership into something that could really solidify into something that is meaningful as an example to not only the rest of the country, but the rest of the world. So what I'm going to do first is just talk through what Utah has already done in these sort of arenas, if you will. And some of these things are under my purview, some of them are not, some of them I have a tangential role, but I'm going to talk you through them all and then talk you through about what comes next for Utah and how we really can be that leader. So first on the policy side, where I am most familiarity. So about maybe 3 or 4 months after OpenAI introduced the first publicly facing ChatGPT LLM that kind of just shocked the world. That was actually literally 3 years ago, almost exactly. I remember it was November of 2022. About a few months after that, myself and the Senate Majority Leader and the House Majority Leader in the state of Utah got together and said, what are we going to do? What is going to be our approach to AI? We are hearing from our constituents that there is this massive anxiety, that there is this massive excitement, probably more anxiety, in fact, than excitement amongst regular folks. How are we going to sort of wrestle with this? And what we did is we came up with a set of principles which are sort of obvious, but important, which is that, and they reflect Utah, which is that Utah, as you all know, it's a tech-forward state. We have Silicon Slopes. We're the number one startup state. There's a lot of tech companies we have. We're tech-forward. We're an innovative state. We are also a family-friendly state. We are also a pro-human agency state. We value those things. And that's why Governor Cox has led out in wanting to regulate social media and rein in social media because of the harms to our kids. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And so we want to be able to make sure that we are fostering innovation. There's a lot of opportunity here. We also want to be able to protect the public. That is also the role of government. And importantly, we need a proactive, because Utah is also proactive, we need a proactive way of monitoring what's happening. What did not happen in government with social media is there was not a proactive observation. That was not happening. People didn't understand how the models worked. They didn't understand the harm they were doing until, frankly, it was too late. It just wasn't happening. So we wanted to build that mechanism into government. So those were our values that we started with. What that resulted in is something that we call our Office of AI Policy. We stood that up. We got that passed in the legislature. We stood it up in our department. Dr. Zach Boyd, I hired to run that office. So we've been working on that for the last year and a half and have done some really remarkable things. By the way, I hired somebody that did know exactly how these systems work. He's a mathematics professor from BYU, which is another interesting point because I think in general in government, we don't have those kinds of people. We don't have people that understand how the systems work. And so it makes it hard for us to govern them. And we didn't want to make that mistake here in Utah. So Zach, you should just stand up and say hi. There's Zach. Clap for Zach. Before I get into this, though, I want to say that part of the law that created this office, we also did something else. We introduced a light regulatory regime. We said, what is the most frequent way that people are interacting with AI right now? Well, it's chatbots, text bots, voice bots, those kinds of things. We said, the most important thing right now is just to make sure that people know they're interacting with AI. And so in our law, we basically just said, you have to disclose. You just have to disclose. So we were the first state to come out to say you have to disclose. Thank you. He's clapping. So we did that, and then we also created this Office of AI Policy. What the office does is it has two functions. One is it runs what we call our learning lab. So we decide on what learning agendas we're going to take on, where are areas where we may need to put in guardrails, or where are actually areas that we need to clear out guardrails or redo the guardrails based on this new technology. And so we do that. We collaborate with companies, with stakeholders, with experts, and then make recommendations to the Utah legislature. So that's the first function. The second function, so this is really all designed to kind of protect the public, but also enable innovation, potentially, right? This other piece, what we call in a very boring way, a regulatory mitigation, but if you're a business and you need regulatory relief, you might think it sounds very exciting. But it basically enables an AI-based company to come to us and say, look, I've got this great model, but because of this existing regulation that was maybe put into place without ever contemplating anything like generative AI, could come to this office and say, we need you to help us get regulatory relief. And then we can work with the relevant regulators, most of whom sit within our department, to do that, to grant that. And so this can help, not only helps to spur innovation in our state, but also helps us to learn, to help us to observe and learn what's happening, what's going on with our companies. And so that's kind of the basis of what the office does. So just a few things so far that we've done. The first learning agenda that we took on was actually around mental health therapy bots, because we saw those as being a narrow area we could target and get going in a short amount of time, but also where there was definitely harm happening, where these models were hallucinating, recommending suicidal actions, these kinds of things. And by the way, you're now putting in your most sensitive data into these bots, right? Far more sensitive than what you've ever written on social media. You're putting into these mental health therapy bots. On the other hand, gosh, maybe they could really help with our mental health crisis if we put in the right guardrails. And so what we did is we developed a policy recommendation that was then passed into law this last legislative session, let out, first in the country to do anything like this, on mental health therapy bots. We said you can't share or sell the data that's being put into these, which again is sort of the default business model of these companies. You can't do it. And then we said, there's an interesting regulatory hook, because right now in the state of Utah, if you want to offer up mental health, you have to be licensed, which means you have to be human. And guess who enforces that? We do. And so we said, we will not go after you as an unlicensed practitioner of mental health therapy if you abide by all these best practices, putting guardrails into how you do it so that you're not hallucinating and making bad recommendations. And so we kind of gave that pathway to innovation while also putting guardrails in. And so that's just like an approach that generally we're trying to take in Utah to support innovation, but put in protections for the public. Right now, we're working on deep fakes, and we're working on companion AIs in terms of legislation. We've got some bills drafted right now. We're working with our legislative partners to get those passed into law this upcoming session, which happens in early 2026. So, yeah, and it's really important stuff. Everyone has seen some of the harms coming out from companion AIs, and the great thing is that Utah is really leading the nation with this approach. We've had international recognition for the innovativeness of this Office of AI Policy, for the generative activity that's coming from it in terms of good and balanced regulation. Here are some things we're going to probably be working on next year: consumer data privacy, healthcare and AI, maybe AI agents. So that's just kind of gives you a glimpse of that. Now, just a sample of our regulatory mitigation. So we have companies, we had actually a mental health therapy bot company come to us and say, we need some regulatory relief. And we said, yes, we can do that for you, again, if you do these things. And by the way, working with them helped inform our legislative approach. So that was actually really helpful. Dentistry. So we have a company that came to us and said, we have this amazing AI tool that can help to image people's mouths really, really accurately. But right now, the regulation says that only dentists can make a diagnosis based on those images. We think our technology, our imaging technology, is so good that really a dental hygienist could do this, which is cheaper. And they wanted to provide, this particular company wanted to provide these services to underserved communities. And so we said, yes, you can. We will waive that regulation that right now says only a dentist can do this, so that you can experiment and come back, and then maybe we can change the law. So that's just some examples of how we can really gain some great value from some of these AI companies by issuing these temporary regulatory relief. Okay, so that's our regulatory approach. So now, what about workforce? Workforce is a huge concern for a lot of people. It is going to be very disruptive. It right now is very disruptive. You've been hearing about how companies are laying thousands of employees off or simply not hiring. Frankly, I think it's a little bit of a hedge. I think we'll see a little bit of a washout in a few years as or companies understand what they need and what they don't need. We did a little bit of analysis on this, and what we've seen is that about 20-ish% of our population and the US population is pretty likely to be easily, at least in a positive light, will be augmented massively with AI, may be displaced based on the capabilities right now that AI has. Interestingly, the US is much more focused on LLMs, on large language models, and using those to potentially disrupt jobs. China is more focused on robots. So those are different kind of jobs that'll probably be disrupted there first. So that's just a little bit. Now, we've already taken a lot of action with both at the higher ed level and at the K-12 level. I'm not going to go through all of this, but there's been various different initiatives to make sure our universities are doing things to help train students in these technologies, both broadly based and creating majors and emphases in this. Berkeley has done this at Utah Valley, actually, University. And in our K-12, we have a great guy there within the Utah Board of Education that is thinking through very, very carefully how to teach our kids AI and build that skill and how to learn with AI, teaching teachers how to do it, those kinds of things. We also have some really significant academic leadership here in Utah. BYU, my alma mater, has been doing some great things to prepare students, specifically creating a major around applied and computational mathematics. Between you and me, I think BYU needs to lead out more on this, especially from a faith-based. Thank you, Bennett. Everyone should be clapping because they need to. Who else is from BYU? BYU needs to lead out more on this, and I think they can. And I think conferences like this should help to spur that. University of Utah has really led out. President Taylor Randall announced about 2 years ago a $100 million investment into a responsible AI initiative to help galvanize faculty around researching really great, doing really great work into research areas that are really very much helpful to humanity. Utah State University has created programs. Utah Valley University has created programs for its students and is also doing really excellent research. Utah State is in many of these areas. We have amazing companies that are doing fantastic work and very positive work in helpful work to humanity. I was with the School AI CEO yesterday. They're really trying to figure out how to make schools use this in a really good and productive way for students that helps teachers, that helps students. That's awesome. We want more of that. Recursion doing groundbreaking work in biotech using AI. Lots of these different companies, and some of them are, well-established companies, but obviously deploying AI in profound ways and have major footprints in Utah, like Adobe and Texas Instruments. State government. The state's Division of Technology Services has really been proactive in deploying AI. Our department has benefited from it. We have our employees using it all the time, experimenting with different ways that we can make our processes more efficient and make it better for the public. And who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want a cheaper way to get your government services done for you, or more efficient or easier? So that's what we're kind of doing there. And there's been just a whole set of different things that are happening at that level. So I'm going to just skip forward a little bit. Some of you might have heard of Operation Gigawatt, something the governor has really backed, wanting to really double the amount of energy that is produced here in the state of Utah, not just to power AI, but to power everything we're trying to do here in the state of Utah, and make sure that any AI data centers that come in here are not really paid for on the backs of ratepayers. Right? Which is basically you and me when we pay for our electricity rates. So that's a really exciting initiative. On our tech policy, just kind of looping back for a minute on our tech policy outside of AI, we've let out, we were the first state to pass laws around regulating social media for kids. We're the enforcer. Thank you, Bennett. Bennett's good over there. We're the enforcers on this law. We cannot enforce it right now because we are being sued by the social media companies on this, okay? And that's happened in every state that has subsequently passed laws on this. And if you want to get into interesting constitutional conversation, I'm happy to tell you where the issues are, because it's quite interesting. I'm not a lawyer, though, just letting you know. We have also sued these social media companies. So the lawsuits from the state of Utah that have been filed against Meta and Snap, and 2 against TikTok, have come from the Department of Commerce under the direction of Governor Cox. And we have also let out in this on protecting our kids. They've been deceptive, saying their products are safe for kids. They are not. They are addictive, and they know it. And they're manipulative, and they know it. So we'll see how those lawsuits work out. Thank you. So we have learned a lot about these business models of these tech companies. And that is why we were motivated to do what we did with social media. Just this past session, we did something very interesting. The first state to come out and pass something called the Utah Digital Choice Act, which essentially allows you as a user of social media to take all of your data that they have about you and port it anywhere you want, and require social media companies to create interoperability so that you can easily go between different platforms. Which means what? It means they don't have a hold on you anymore, and that they have to compete for your business, which they're not right now. They have to make it so that you feel like, gosh, they have a really great algorithm that's making me feel good and not crappy, and it's not exploiting me. They have to compete for your business instead of really having a monopoly because you're stuck there because you can't leave. All your friends are there, all your followers are there, those kinds of things. We also were the first state to pass the App Store Accountability Act, which basically puts in age assurance mechanisms into when your kid is trying to download an app. So really great work that the state of Utah is doing. I wanted you guys to all know that, because of course, a lot of this work is informed by faith, whether it's the LDS faith or other people's faith or the other kinds of faith or just values that really stem from being in Utah. So then, how does Utah lead out with all of this work that we've already done, right? Well, first, I think we can lead out by just connecting everything more, right? Making sure our industry is connected with our startup ecosystem so they can benefit from research and from opportunities to start businesses. Making sure that our workforce and our higher ed our industry is aligned with where our higher ed is so that we can make sure our workforce is prepared. Making sure that our regulatory policies is aligned and connected to what businesses and consumers are needing. So making sure we're connected. But finally, we can lead out in a pro-human way, okay? So if you all come to the Utah AI Summit, which our department and the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity are co-hosting on December 2nd, the governor will be laying out and announcing this pro-human AI initiative. And it will go across those different dimensions I just talked about and how we can connect all of those, our regulatory policy, our state government deployment of AI, our research institutions, our workforce development, our industry, and do it in a way that is pro-human. Building cultural norms and connections to ensure that it is pro-human. That is what is incredibly important right now. We want our AI infrastructure and development to be pro-free will, to be pro-human interaction, to be pro-empowerment, to be pro-learning, to be pro-thinking, to be pro-healing. All of these things that many of the products and services we're seeing right now are not. And they don't have to be that way. Those are choices by people at the companies. Those are business model choices, and they don't have to be that way. And we can build cultural norms here in Utah so that they are not that way. We can challenge that status quo, what's coming out of Silicon Valley. We can challenge this idea that AI has to be exploitative and manipulative and data sucking and privacy compromising. It doesn't have to be that way. And importantly, we have to be able to build trust. If we can't trust these technologies, people are just going to stop engaging. And I hope that the companies that are producing untrustworthy products understand this, or are starting to understand this. We want to make sure that AI companies and that AI products and services are trustworthy. That comes from not just regulation, it comes from cultural norms, it comes from what we as a people decide we're going to do and what we're going to tolerate. So, what might that look like? Here are some possible values on each of these different dimensions we just talked about that is pro-human. So regulatory policy, we want it to be trust building. We want it to be informed, stakeholder informed. We want it to be balanced. Workforce development, we want it to be empowering to people. We want it to be equalizing, so there's not so much asymmetry. We want it to be resilience focused. With our academic research, we want it to be human problem focused and relevant problem focused. With industry, we want it to be value based and accountable. We just talked about this. We want it to be connected. We want it to be innovative. With our government deployment, we want it to set the example. We want it to be trustworthy to our citizens. We want it to be competent and confidence-inducing to you as citizens. And our infrastructure, we want it to ensure that it is accounting for population growth and not just data centers, and it continues to maintain reasonable rates for all of us. So those are some of the ideas that we have circulating around. Just now, we are hosting these visioning workshops with experts in all of these areas so that we can really build out a plan for the state of Utah to be pro-human in its AI approach. So thank you very much.